The morning sun cast long shadows across Windsor Castle as King Charles III sat in his private study, reviewing official documents. The weight of the crown had never felt heavier than it did that particular Tuesday in October. Outside his window, autumn leaves danced in the crisp air, but inside the castle walls, tension was building like a storm ready to break. Camilla, now queen consort, entered the room with purposeful steps. Her usually warm demeanor had been replaced by something much more serious. She had been watching Charles struggle with a decision that would affect not just the royal family, but the entire monarchy's future. The issue at hand was William's growing frustration with certain royal protocols and his father's handling of modernizing the institution. "Charles, we need to talk," Camilla said, closing the heavy oak door behind her. The sound echoed through the room like a final warning. Charles looked up from his papers, immediately sensing the gravity in her voice. After years of marriage, he knew that tone meant serious business. The conversation that followed would change everything. Camilla had been observing the growing rift between Charles and William for months. She watched as father and son exchanged increasingly tense conversations about the direction of the monarchy. William wanted faster changes, more transparency, and a complete overhaul of how the royal family connected with the public. Charles, traditional by nature, believed in gradual change and maintaining certain time-honored customs. "You're losing him," Camilla said bluntly, referring to William. "Every time you dismiss his ideas, every time you tell him to wait, you're pushing your own son away. The future king is slipping through your fingers, and you're too stubborn to see it." Charles felt his jaw tighten. He had been king for over a year now, and the pressure was immense. Every decision was scrutinized, every move analyzed by the media and the public. The last thing he needed was criticism from his own wife about how he handled his relationship with his eldest son. "William doesn't understand the complexities involved," Charles replied, his voice strained. "He thinks being king means you can just change everything overnight. But there are traditions, protocols, and expectations that have existed for centuries. I can't just throw them all away because he's impatient." Camilla moved closer to his desk, her eyes never leaving his face. "And what happens when those traditions become more important than your own family? What happens when the institution becomes more valuable than the people who serve it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Charles had spent his entire life preparing to be king, but nothing had prepared him for the impossible balance between being a father and being a monarch. The crown demanded one thing, his heart another. "William has valid points," Camilla continued, her voice softer now but no less firm. "The younger generation sees the world differently. They want authenticity, connection, and real change. If you keep shutting him down, you'll lose not just your son, but the future of everything you're trying to protect." Charles stood up abruptly, walking to the window. The grounds of Windsor stretched before him, manicured and perfect, just like the image the royal family was expected to maintain. But perfection, he was learning, came at a terrible cost. "So, what exactly are you suggesting?" he asked, still facing the window. "That I abandon everything my mother built? That I ignore the advice of constitutional experts and government officials just to please William?" "I'm suggesting you listen to him," Camilla said simply. "Really listen. Not as a king receiving suggestions from a future heir, but as a father hearing his son's concerns. When was the last time you two had a real conversation? Not about duties or obligations, but about what you both actually want for this family." The silence that followed was deafening. Charles realized he couldn't remember the last time he and William had talked without the weight of royal duty hanging over every word. Everything had become about succession planning, public appearances, and maintaining the monarchy's reputation. "He's not just the future king, Charles. He's your son. And right now he feels like you don't respect his judgment or trust his instincts. That's dangerous for both of you, and it's dangerous for the crown." Charles turned back to face her, and for the first time in months, Camilla saw uncertainty in his eyes. The confident king disappeared, replaced by a father who was genuinely worried about losing his child. "What if his ideas are wrong?" Charles asked quietly. "What if the changes he wants to make damage the monarchy irreparably? I'll be remembered as the king who destroyed what took centuries to build." "And what if his ideas are right?" Camilla countered. "What if refusing to change is what destroys it?" "The world is different now, Charles. People want transparency. They want to see that the royal family is human, that you care about the same things they do. William understands that in a way that perhaps you don't." The weight of her words settled on Charles's shoulders. He had spent so many years waiting to be king that he had forgotten how to be anything else. Every decision was filtered through centuries of tradition and protocol. But Camilla was right about one thing. He was losing William, and he could feel it happening more each day. "The Prime Minister expects certain things," Charles said, grasping for justification. "Parliament has expectations. The Commonwealth countries are watching every move we make. I can't just ignore all of that because William has new ideas." "Nobody's asking you to ignore anything," Camilla replied. "But maybe it's time to consider that some of those expectations need to change too. Maybe the real threat to the monarchy isn't change. Maybe it's refusing to evolve." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The autumn storm was getting closer, just like the family crisis that was about to unfold. Charles felt the ground shifting beneath him, not just as a king, but as a father who might be making the biggest mistake of his life. The conversation was far from over, but already Charles could sense that everything was about to change. The question was whether that change would bring his family together or tear them apart forever. What he didn't know was that William was already on his way to the castle, and he was angrier than his father had ever seen him. William's car pulled through the gates of Windsor Castle with unusual speed. His knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw clenched tight with frustration that had been building for weeks. The phone call he had received that morning from a palace aide had been the final straw. Once again, his father had dismissed one of his proposals without even discussing it properly. Catherine had tried to calm him before he left Kensington Palace. "Maybe there's been a misunderstanding," she had suggested gently. But William knew better. There was no misunderstanding. His father simply didn't respect his opinions, and it was becoming clearer every day that Charles saw him as nothing more than an heir-in-waiting, not a partner in modernizing the monarchy. The proposal that had been rejected was close to William's heart. He had spent months developing a plan to make the royal family more accessible to young people, including regular town halls where citizens could ask direct questions about royal decisions and spending. It was innovative, transparent, and exactly what the monarchy needed to stay relevant in the modern world. But Charles had dismissed it as too risky and inappropriate for royal protocol. As William walked through the castle corridors, his footsteps echoed with determination. Staff members he passed noticed his expression and wisely stayed out of his way. They had worked in the royal household long enough to recognize when a storm was brewing, and today felt different from the usual family tensions they occasionally witnessed. He reached his father's study and knocked once before entering without waiting for permission. Charles and Camilla both looked up in surprise. The king was still standing by the window while Camilla remained near his desk. The tension in the room was already thick, but William's arrival made it almost suffocating. "We need to talk," William said, his voice controlled but clearly angry. "Now." Charles straightened his shoulders, immediately shifting into his formal, kingly demeanor. "William, I wasn't expecting you. Perhaps we could schedule a proper meeting through your private secretary." "No," William said firmly, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. "I'm tired of scheduling meetings to talk to my own father. I'm tired of having every conversation filtered through secretaries and protocols." and I'm especially tired of having my ideas dismissed without even the courtesy of a real discussion." Camilla looked between father and son, recognizing that the explosion she had just warned Charles about was happening right before her eyes. She had told him he was losing William, but even she hadn't expected it to come to a head this quickly. "Your town hall proposal was reviewed carefully," Charles said, trying to maintain his calm, royal composure. "The advisors felt it was too radical a departure from established practices. These decisions aren't made lightly." "My proposal?" William laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You mean the proposal you had your advisors reject before you even read it properly? The proposal that could help connect our family with people under the age of 50? That proposal?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Charles had never seen William this angry, not even during his most rebellious teenage years. This was different. This was the fury of a grown man who felt completely dismissed and disrespected by someone he had always looked up to. "William, you need to understand that being king means making difficult decisions," Charles began, but his son cut him off immediately. "Don't lecture me about being king." William's voice rose sharply. "I've been preparing for that role my entire life, just like you did. The difference is, I'm trying to prepare for being a king in the 21st century, not the 19th. Camilla took a small step backward, recognizing that this conversation had moved far beyond anything she could mediate. This was years of frustration exploding all at once, and she could see that both men were past the point of rational discussion. "You want to know what I understand about being king?" William continued, his anger building with each word. "I understand that if we don't change, we'll become irrelevant. I understand that people want authenticity, not just ceremony. I understand that the monarchy's survival depends on proving we're worth keeping, not just assuming people will always accept us because we're royal." Charles felt his own temper rising. "And I understand that you can't just throw away centuries of tradition because some focus group told you young people want something different. The monarchy has survived this long because we respect what came before us." "Survived?" William's voice was incredulous. "Is that what you call this? Barely hanging on while approval ratings drop and people question whether we should exist at all? That's not surviving, Father. That's dying slowly." The word father was said with such pain and frustration that it hit Charles like a physical blow. This wasn't just about royal policy anymore. This was about a son who felt completely unheard by the parent he had always tried to please. "You never listened to me," William continued, his voice breaking slightly. "Not really. You ask for my input, but you've already made up your mind. You want me to be ready to be king, but you won't let me have any real say in how we prepare for that future. I'm 39 years old, and you still treat me like a child who doesn't understand the real world." Charles opened his mouth to respond, but William wasn't finished. The floodgates had opened, and years of suppressed frustration came pouring out. "Do you know what it's like to watch the institution you're supposed to inherit slowly crumble while your own father refuses to make the changes that could save it? Do you know what it's like to have ideas that could help our family stay relevant, only to be told they're too radical by advisors who think the solution to every problem is to do exactly what we did 50 years ago?" Camilla watched Charles's face carefully. She could see the exact moment when his defensive anger began to crack, revealing the hurt underneath. He was finally beginning to understand that this wasn't about royal protocol or constitutional law. This was about a father and son who had lost the ability to communicate with each other. "I've tried to do everything right," William said, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. "I married the right person. I've raised my children to understand their responsibilities. I've supported every decision you've made, even when I disagreed with them. But apparently, none of that matters because you still don't trust my judgment." The silence that followed was heavy with emotion. Charles realized that somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing William as his son and started seeing him only as his heir. Every conversation had become about duty and obligation, never about the actual person his son had become. "William," Charles began slowly, but his son held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not finished," William said, "because this isn't just about me anymore. This is about George, Charlotte, and Louis. This is about the monarchy they're going to inherit. If we can't figure out how to work together, if we can't find a way to balance tradition with progress, then we're setting them up for failure before they even begin." The mention of his grandchildren hit Charles harder than anything else William had said. The future of the monarchy wasn't just about him or William anymore. It was about the next generation, children who would grow up in a world even more different from the one Charles knew. The mention of his grandchildren seemed to drain all the fight out of Charles. For the first time since William had stormed into the room, the king looked not angry or defensive, but genuinely heartbroken. The reality of what his son was saying finally began to sink in. This wasn't just about their relationship anymore. This was about the future of everything they both claimed to care about. "You think I don't trust you," Charles said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "But that's not what this is about. I'm terrified, William. I'm terrified of making the wrong decisions. I'm terrified of being remembered as the king who destroyed what my mother spent 70 years building." William looked at his father with surprise. In all his years, he had never heard Charles admit to being afraid of anything. The king had always projected confidence, even when making difficult decisions. This vulnerability was completely unexpected. "Every change you suggest feels like a risk I can't afford to take," Charles continued. "What if you're wrong? What if opening up the monarchy the way you want to actually makes people lose respect for us? What if transparency just gives our critics more ammunition to use against us?" Camilla, who had been watching this exchange in silence, finally spoke up. "And what if he's right?" she asked gently. "What if refusing to change is the bigger risk?" Charles turned to look at his wife, and William could see the exhaustion in his father's eyes. Being king had aged him in ways that went beyond the physical. The weight of the crown was crushing him, and he had been carrying it alone because he was afraid to share the burden with anyone, even his own son. "I spent so many years waiting to be king," Charles said, sinking into his chair. "I thought I was ready. I thought I understood what it would be like. But I was wrong. Every decision feels impossible. Every choice could be the wrong one. And now you're telling me that trying to protect what we have is actually destroying it." William felt his anger begin to fade, replaced by something he hadn't expected: sympathy. For the first time, he was seeing his father not as the stubborn king who wouldn't listen to reason, but as a man overwhelmed by impossible responsibilities and terrified of failure. "Father," William said, using the word differently this time, with affection rather than frustration. "You don't have to carry this alone. That's what I've been trying to tell you. We're supposed to be partners in this. The monarchy is strongest when we work together, not when you try to protect it by yourself." Charles looked up at his son with tears in his eyes. "But what if your ideas are wrong? What if I let you make changes that destroy everything?" "Then we'll figure it out together," William said simply. "But what if my ideas are right? What if the changes I'm suggesting actually strengthen the monarchy and help it survive for George and his children? Isn't that possibility worth the risk?" Camilla moved closer to Charles, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This is what I was trying to tell you earlier," she said softly. "You're so afraid of making mistakes that you're making the biggest mistake of all. You're shutting out the one person who should be your closest ally." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. The anger and frustration had been replaced by something more honest and raw. For the first time in months, the three of them were having a real conversation instead of just exchanging formal positions. "Tell me about the town hall idea again," Charles said finally. "Not the official version. Tell me what you really think it could accomplish." William sat down across from his father, feeling hopeful for the first time in weeks. "People feel disconnected from us," he began. "They see us at formal events and ceremonies, but they don't feel like they know who we really are or what we actually care about. The town halls would be a chance for real conversation. People could ask us directly about how royal money is spent, why we make certain decisions, what our priorities are for the future." "And you think that would help our public image?" Charles asked. "I think it would help people see us as real human beings who care about the same things they do," William replied. "Right now, we're just symbols to most people. Symbols can be replaced or eliminated. But if people see us as genuine partners in making the country better, that's much harder to dismiss." Charles was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking through the implications. "What about the risks? What if people ask questions we can't answer? What if they're hostile?" "Then we deal with it honestly," William said. "We admit when we don't know something. We explain why certain decisions are made. We show people that we're not pretending to be perfect, just committed to serving them as best we can." Camilla watched Charles carefully as he processed this. She could see him beginning to understand what William had been trying to tell him for months. The greatest risk to the monarchy wasn't change, it was irrelevance. "Your grandmother would never have considered something like this," Charles said slowly. "Grandmother ruled in a different time," William replied. "She was brilliant at what she did. But the world has changed. People's expectations have changed. We can honor her legacy while still adapting to the present." Charles stood up and walked back to the window, looking out at the grounds that had been home to kings and queens for nearly 1,000 years. So much history, so much tradition. But William was right. Tradition was only valuable if it served a purpose in the modern world. "If we do this," Charles said finally, "if we try your approach, there's no going back. Once we open that door, people will expect more transparency, more access, more accountability. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny?" "I think we're already under that level of scrutiny," William replied. "The difference is right now we're being judged without having a chance to explain ourselves. This would give us a chance to control our own narrative instead of letting others define us." Camilla smiled slightly, recognizing that the tide was finally turning. Charles was actually considering William's ideas instead of just rejecting them out of hand. "All right," Charles said, turning back to face his son. "Let's try it. But we do this carefully. We start small, maybe one town hall every few months. We prepare thoroughly for every question we might face. And if it doesn't work, if it damages our standing, we reconsider." William's face lit up with the first genuine smile Charles had seen from him in months. "Really? You're willing to try it?" "I'm willing to trust your judgment," Charles replied. "But more than that, I'm willing to admit that maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe the monarchy really does need fresh thinking to survive." Father and son looked at each other across the room, and for the first time in years, they saw each other clearly. Not as king and heir, not as tradition versus progress, but as two men who loved their family and wanted to preserve it for future generations. "I'm sorry," Charles said simply. "I'm sorry for not listening to you. I'm sorry for making you feel like your opinions don't matter. And I'm sorry for almost losing you because I was too afraid to change." William crossed the room and embraced his father, something that hadn't happened in a formal setting like this in years. "We're going to figure this out together," he said. "That's what families do." Camilla watched them with relief and satisfaction. Her intervention had worked better than she had hoped. The silence she had imposed on Charles, forcing him to really hear what William was saying, had finally broken through years of miscommunication and stubbornness. Outside, the autumn storm was beginning to pass, and sunlight was breaking through the clouds. Inside Windsor Castle, a new chapter in the monarchy's history was beginning to unfold, one based on partnership rather than tradition alone.